The stars hung cold over the Draconid citadel, their light slicing through the dark glass of the towers like thin silver knives. Elira Voss walked through the grand halls, her heart racing. She was 19, small for a diplomat and completely human. And tonight, she was to be married to Veilthrix, the dragon leader of the Draconid Dominion. He was 750 years old, massive and terrifying. Even the most hardened soldiers avoided his gaze. The galaxy whispered that humans could not survive such unions. And yet here she was, stepping forward into a future nobody could imagine. The hall was silent. Not a single Draconid spoke, though hundreds were gathered to witness this political act. Their scales shimmered faintly under the lights, some metallic, some matte, but all exuding an aura of ancient power. The air smelled of ozone and hot metal. Elira kept her head high, forcing herself to ignore the tightness in her chest. She could hear the hum of their engines beneath their wings, the mechanical rhythm of their hearts, even the faint vibration of their thoughts. This was more than a species. It was a legacy of war, discipline, and domination that stretched across centuries. Veilthrix stood at the center, taller than any human could hope to be. His wings folded neatly against his back, scales the color of burnished bronze glinting with an inner heat. His eyes were liquid gold, observing her with an intelligence that seemed to pierce straight through bone and muscle. He was calm, unnervingly calm. His voice, when it came, was like gravel rolling over metal. "Elira Voss," he said. "You have come willingly?" "Yes," she said, her voice steady though her stomach churned. "I came willingly." A ripple ran through the assembled Draconids. No human had ever spoken to Veilthrix like that. Usually they trembled, begged, or refused. Fear was the language of survival, but Elira's calmness was alien to them. Some of the younger dragons exchanged confused looks. Some of the elders frowned. The ceremony began. Ancient symbols glowed faintly on the floor, light spilling over the dark stone. The ritual was simple in form but terrifying in meaning. It was said that the bond of a dragon and a human could either break the human or bind the human spirit to the dragon forever. Few humans survived the first night. That knowledge pressed against Elira's mind like ice, but she refused to think about it. She focused on the here and now, the sound of her own breathing, the steady rhythm of her steps across the stone floor. Veilthrix lowered his massive head, bringing it closer to her. The heat from his scales washed over her, a wave of power and age that made her shiver. She felt the weight of centuries in that gaze, and for a moment she wondered what it was like to live 750 years. To see empires rise and fall. To watch friends and enemies fade into dust. Elira thought of her own life, short and fleeting, and felt a strange connection to the dragon. Both of them were bound by forces greater than themselves, only in different ways. The crowd of dragons watched as she placed her hand on Veilthrix's scaled chest. His heartbeat was strong, steady, and ancient. A faint vibration ran through her fingers, a language she could not yet understand. He did not flinch. He did not roar. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if recognizing a quality in her that others could not see. She was not afraid, and perhaps that was the key. The ritual required that she speak words of acceptance. She took a deep breath. "I will honor the bond. I will respect the Dominion. I will learn your ways and speak truth when I must." Her voice echoed through the hall. It was not a plea, not a demand. It was a promise. Veilthrix nodded slowly. A low hum resonated from deep within him, shaking the stone floors. It was a sound the dragons understood as approval, though it carried an edge of curiosity as well. No human had ever made him curious. They were always predictable, fragile, fleeting. But Elira was different. The first moments passed without incident. No fire, no claws, no collapse. The silence was deafening. Whispers among the younger dragons began, quiet at first, then louder. "She is alive. She speaks without fear. Can she survive?" The elders scowled. This was not how things should happen. The first night was meant to be the proving ground, a test of courage that humans rarely survived. But this human did not shrink. She did not scream. Elira could feel the tension, the quiet judgment of centuries pressing down on her. She reminded herself that she was here not as a bride in the old sense, but as a diplomat, a bridge between two species. Every step, every breath, every word mattered. Veilthrix's eyes followed her, tracking not just her movements, but the currents of her mind. She wondered if he understood her purpose. Perhaps he did. Perhaps that was why he allowed her to walk through the hall unscathed. Time stretched. Minutes felt like hours. The ceremony ended with a subtle shift, a hum of energy, the faint glow of the bonds forming. Elira's pulse matched the rhythm of the ancient dragon beside her. A bond had been made, not through force but through acknowledgement. Both species felt it. Humans had never done this before. The galaxy had never witnessed it. When the last light of the ritual faded, Veilthrix lowered his head again closer to her face. He did not speak. He did not move aggressively. He simply observed, golden eyes reflecting her own determination. Elira realized something. The night that was supposed to end in fear had become a night of balance. She had survived, and in surviving she had changed the rules of the Dominion, at least in that moment. The draconids slowly dispersed, whispering among themselves. Some were angry, some confused, some intrigued. Elira felt a strange calm as she watched them leave. She was not just a human. She was a presence that the ancient dragons could not ignore. And Veilthrix, the leader who had ruled for centuries, was now curious about her. Alone in the center of the citadel, she looked up at the stars again. They did not seem cold now. They seemed like witnesses to something new, something dangerous but something hopeful. The night that should have been her end was only the beginning. And Elira Voss knew that in surviving this night she had done more than live. She had planted the seed of change in an empire that had not seen change in 700 years. The citadel was quiet after the ceremony. The crowd of dragons had left, returning to their chambers, their whispers fading like echoes across the stone halls. Only Elira and Veilthrix remained. The young human felt the weight of the silence pressing down on her, but she did not falter. She had survived the ritual, and now she had to face the night itself. Veilthrix moved closer, his massive wings folding softly against his back. The heat from his body radiated outward, warming the cold halls. His eyes, golden and bright, studied her as if trying to read her thoughts. Elira kept her gaze steady. She had learned quickly that fear was a language the dragons understood, but calm was one they rarely saw. It made them uneasy, even curious. "You are still alive," Veilthrix said, his voice low, rumbling like distant thunder. "No human has endured what you have endured tonight." "I am alive," Elira said simply. She did not add that she was not afraid. She knew that the human trait of resilience was not yet fully understood by the draconids. "I am here. That is enough." He tilted his head, studying her. There was no threat in his posture, only observation. The silence of the citadel was profound. No engines hummed, no mechanical wings moved. Even the faint electrical pulse of the walls seemed to hold its breath. Elira realized that she was not merely surviving, she was being studied. Every heartbeat, every movement, every thought she carried was being observed by a creature older than almost everything she had ever known. Veilthrix lowered his head to her level. The tips of his snout almost brushed her shoulder. Elira could feel the heat of his scales, the ancient rhythm of his body. She placed her hand on his chest again, feeling the steady vibration of his life. He had lived centuries, seen empires rise and fall, and yet, tonight, he had allowed her to exist without fear. That was more power than many humans would ever understand. "You do not tremble," he said. "You do not plead. You do not cry." "I have nothing to plead," she said. "And crying will not help." Veilthrix's eyes narrowed slightly. No human had ever spoken to him like this. Usually they begged or screamed, or broke under the pressure of his presence. Elira's calmness was foreign, almost unsettling but also interesting. The dragon had ruled for centuries with strength and fear as his tools. Now he was facing something he did not understand, a human who could endure and observe without panic. Elira looked around the great hall. Shadows stretched along the walls, cast by the soft glow of energy lines etched into the stone. She thought of the humans she had left behind on her home planet, fragile and small compared to dragons, yet capable of surviving and adapting in ways that giants could not. She realized that this night was not meant to destroy her, it was meant to test her, and she had passed. Veilthrix began to circle slowly, each step echoing like the beat of a drum. Elira watched him, noting the way his muscles moved beneath the scales, the subtle shifts in the heat of his body. He was not just a creature of strength, he was a creature of thought, experience and memory. 750 years of leadership had honed him into something both terrifying and magnificent. "You are different," Veilthrix said finally, pausing before her. "I have seen humans before, many. They fear too easily. They are weak in ways we dragons have no patience for. But you—" "I am human," Elira said. "That is all I need to be." Veilthrix studied her longer, as if weighing the meaning behind her words. The night stretched on, quiet except for the faint hum of energy in the walls. Elira did not flinch, did not move away. She understood that dragons valued honesty and presence above all else. If she could maintain her composure, she could earn their respect or at least their curiosity. Hours passed in silence. Neither spoke much, but the quiet was not empty. It was a communication of its own. The dragon observed her, learning what made humans endure. She observed him, learning how the oldest creatures in the galaxy thought, how they weighed decisions and how they measured threats. By midnight, something subtle had shifted. The tension that had gripped the citadel during the ceremony had loosened. Veilthrix's massive shoulders relaxed slightly. His eyes were still sharp, still golden, but the edge of suspicion had softened. Alira sensed it. She realized that in simply existing, in simply being calm and steady, she had begun to influence him. The first night was not just a test of survival, it was a test of understanding. She had survived the dragon's judgment without showing fear or weakness, and that had forced Veilthrix to see her as more than a human to be feared. She was an equal in presence if not yet in strength. When dawn approached, the hall began to glow faintly with the light of the rising sun outside. The shadows of the citadel retreated. Veilthrix lowered his head near her once more. The golden eyes softened in a way that suggested something remarkable. Recognition, perhaps even respect. "You have done what few could do," he said. "You have survived the night of silence." "I only did what I had to do," Alira replied. "And I will do what I must next. Survival is only the first step." Veilthrix regarded her for a long moment, then finally straightened. The night had ended, but the bond remained. He had expected weakness, fear, maybe defiance. Instead, he had found calm, courage, and understanding. The dragons of the Dominion would speak of this night for centuries, not because she had married their leader, but because she had faced him without flinching and had changed the rules of what they thought a human could do. As Alira left the hall to her private chambers, she felt the weight of what had just happened. She was not merely a bride. She was a bridge between humans and dragons, a symbol that strength was not always fire and scale. It could be courage, calm, and understanding. The first night of silence had passed, and in passing, it had set the stage for change. The galaxy, unaware of the events, would not see it yet. But in the citadel, in the chambers of the oldest dragon alive, a new kind of respect had begun to grow. And Alira Voss, the 19-year-old human, had survived to see it. News traveled faster than light across the galaxy. Rumors of a human who had married the dragon leader and survived the first night spread like sparks in dry fuel. In the distant colonies, diplomats whispered in fear. Traders murmured in markets. Soldiers shared tales in secret barracks. No one had ever heard of a human enduring the ancient rituals of the Draconid Dominion, and everyone wondered how it was possible. Alira Voss, the 19-year-old from a small, overlooked planet, had become a legend overnight. The whispers reached the ears of Veilthrix's council. The dragon elders were unsettled. Some were angry, believing that Alira's presence threatened centuries of tradition. Others were curious, seeing in her a potential bridge between the dragons and a species they had long considered fragile. The council debated quietly in the high towers, their voices low and rumbling, the words sharp with centuries of authority. Meanwhile, Alira moved through the citadel with measured steps. She had learned quickly that the eyes of dragons were never idle. Every action, every pause, every glance carried meaning. She listened more than she spoke, observing the subtle shifts in their behavior. The younger dragons were fascinated, watching her as if she were a puzzle they could not solve. The elders scowled, but they too observed. Even in their judgment, they could not ignore her presence. The galaxy watched too. Humans on distant worlds debated the meaning of her survival. Some feared it was a trap, that the dragons were testing the species in ways no one could anticipate. Others were inspired, seeing in Alira a symbol of human courage and resilience. Stories of her calmness and determination spread in simple words that even the smallest colonies could understand. Her survival was not just personal, it had become a statement of human endurance. Alira had little time for fear or pride. She began studying the dragon's ways. Their history was written not in books but in memory, in patterns of thought and action that had guided the Dominion for centuries. She learned of their past wars, their victories, their losses, and their slow decline from stagnation. Though they were powerful, they were trapped in cycles of tradition that prevented innovation. Alira realized that this was the true weakness of the Draconids. They had lived too long without change. Veilthrix watched her closely more than ever. He had ruled for 750 years, seeing empires rise and fall. He had never met a human who could endure the night of silence, let alone study dragons without fear. Her presence challenged him in ways that no warrior or diplomat ever had. He found himself curious, a feeling he had not experienced in centuries. It was not just curiosity about her, but about the possibilities she represented. Whispers among the dragons began to reach even the younger members of the Dominion. "She speaks without fear," one said, his voice tinged with awe. "She sees through our ways," another whispered. The council elders frowned. Some tried to dismiss the observations, claiming that humans could never understand dragons. But the evidence was growing. Elira's calmness, her patience, her careful observation. It was changing the perception of humans among the Dominion, slowly but surely. In the colonies, humans speculated about what it meant. Was she negotiating a new alliance? Was she learning secrets of the dragons to use against them? Or was it something more subtle, an understanding that could change the balance of power in the galaxy? Stories spread that Elira had walked among the ancient beings, had studied their ways, and had survived without submitting or rebelling. She became a symbol of the unexpected strength of humanity. As days passed, Elira began to realize the power of observation. She did not command dragons with force, but by noticing what others overlooked, she could influence them subtly. She asked questions not as a human inferior but as a listener. She spoke with honesty, and the dragons, unused to such straightforwardness, were drawn to her words. Veilthrix began to trust her judgment, consulting her quietly on matters that would have once seemed trivial. The council began to watch her more closely. Some elders were skeptical, fearing she might manipulate the dragon leader. Others were fascinated by her ability to survive and adapt in ways dragons could not anticipate. They whispered to each other, debating if the human survival skills were an asset or a threat. Some even wondered if they could learn from her, though none dared say it aloud. Elira herself understood the precariousness of her position. She was neither fully trusted nor fully accepted. Her survival was an achievement, but it had also placed her in the center of a web of political and cultural tension. One wrong word, one misstep, could undo everything she had accomplished. Yet she remained composed. Fear had no power over her. Observation, understanding, and patience were her tools. Veilthrix approached her one evening in the great hall. The room was empty, bathed in the dim glow of the energy lines in the floor. He studied her quietly before speaking. "The galaxy watches," he said, his voice low. "They do not understand why you survive, why you endure. They whisper about you." "I do not need them to understand," Elira replied. "I only need to survive and learn. That is enough." Veilthrix nodded, his massive head lowering slightly. "You are different from the others. Humans are fragile, easily broken. You are not. That makes you dangerous and valuable." Elira met his gaze evenly. "I will use that strength to help, not to harm. I will learn your ways and show that humans can adapt without threatening your order." The dragon leader regarded her silently for a long moment. His golden eyes reflected the faint glow of the hall. He was beginning to understand something the council had not yet realized. Humans were not weak because of their size or lifespan. Humans survived because they adapted, observed, and endured. They could survive in ways dragons could not. By the end of the week, whispers across the stars had become stories. Traders carried the tale to every corner of the galaxy. Scholars debated it in quiet rooms. Soldiers spoke of it in hushed tones. Elira Voss had survived, yes, but more than that, she had begun to change how the galaxy saw humans. She was no longer just a young diplomat. She was a symbol of human resilience and adaptability. And in the quiet halls of the Citadel, Veilthrix began to wonder if this human, who had survived the impossible, might be more than a bridge between species. Perhaps she was the first step toward a new understanding, one that could change the Dominion itself. Elira smiled faintly as she looked out at the stars. The galaxy was full of whispers, some of fear, some of hope. She understood now that survival was not just about enduring the night. It was about letting your presence speak louder than your fear. And tonight, her presence had begun to speak across the stars. Elira had grown used to the quiet observation of the dragons, but nothing could have prepared her for the summons to the Dragon Council. The great hall where they convened was older than any human record, carved from stone that glowed faintly with ancient energy. Columns spiraled toward the sky, etched with symbols that pulsed softly, almost alive. The air hummed with power, and the weight of centuries pressed down on her like a physical force. She was not alone. Veilthrix walked beside her, his massive form a shadow that seemed to fill the hall. The council awaited at the far end, a semicircle of towering dragons, their scales reflecting every color of fire and metal. Their eyes, deep and ancient, followed her every movement. Some were curious, some were skeptical, and a few, the oldest among them, were openly hostile. "You have survived the first night," the eldest counselor said, his voice a low rumble that shook the stones. Yet survival is not enough. Humans are fragile. They bend under pressure, they break under the weight of eternity. You will now face a trial that tests not body but spirit. A trial that even dragons find difficult to endure. Alira nodded, her hands steady at her sides. She had prepared herself mentally. She had learned that courage for humans was not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. She would need every ounce of patience and observation she had cultivated. The council moved aside, revealing a circular chamber within the hall. In the center, a platform glowed with shifting patterns of light. The trial had begun. The rules were simple in description but impossible in execution. She had to confront the collective judgment of the dragons, enduring visions, voices, and illusions meant to overwhelm. Humans had never faced this trial, and few dragons did so willingly. As she stepped onto the platform, the air seemed to tighten around her. The symbols on the floor flared, sending waves of energy through her body. Voices echoed in her mind, some harsh, some mocking, some questioning her right to exist. Alira focused on her own heartbeat, steady and calm, letting the noise wash over her without reaction. The dragons watched, their golden eyes sharp and unyielding. Visions appeared before her, shifting shapes of fire and shadow. They depicted humans failing, empires falling, and dragons triumphing in centuries of war. The images were meant to instill fear, to bend her mind, but Alira kept her gaze forward. She reminded herself that the trial was not punishment, it was understanding. She had to show them that humans could endure not by strength alone, but by resilience, observation, and reason. A counselor's voice thundered in her mind. Why do you persist, human? Why do you not flee? Why do you not cry? I persist, Alira thought back, projecting calm in the only way she could, because survival is not enough. Understanding, courage, and honesty matter more. The chamber responded to her words. The light shifted, the visions flickered. Some counselors leaned forward, their scales reflecting surprise. They had expected resistance, fear, or panic, but Alira met each test with clarity. Every illusion that tried to twist her perception was met with reason and observation. She learned each pattern quickly, recognizing the intent behind the visions. Veilthrix stood near the edge of the platform, silent but attentive. Even for a dragon of his age, the trial tested patience and perception. He had ruled for centuries, but observing Alira navigate the trial without fear sparked something he had not felt in decades: respect. He did not intervene, though he could have crushed the illusions with a thought. Instead, he let her prove herself, understanding that the trial was as much for the council as it was for the human. Hours passed in this way. Time seemed to stretch, and the visions became more complex, more pressing. Shadows of ancient dragons, monsters, and failures danced before her. The council spoke without words, sending thoughts of doubt and intimidation. Yet Alira remained steady. She spoke calmly, reasoning with each illusion, observing the weaknesses and patterns in the dragon's projections. Her human mind, unbound by centuries of tradition, adapted quickly. Finally, the chamber fell silent. The light on the platform dimmed and the visions vanished. The council members studied her, their eyes a mixture of astonishment and curiosity. No human had ever endured the trial older than fire and remained whole. Most dragons who attempted it emerged changed but shaken, their perspective altered. Alira had faced it with calmness and intelligence, showing a kind of strength the Dominion had never recognized in humans. The eldest counselor stepped forward, his massive head lowering. You have not failed, he said. Nor have you bent under the weight of the trial. You endure because you are human, yet your mind is steady, your will unwavering. It is not mere survival, it is wisdom. Perhaps humans are not as fragile as we believed. Veilthrix exhaled, a low hum of satisfaction vibrating through the chamber. He looked at her with a mixture of pride and contemplation. She had done what no one thought possible. She had survived, and in doing so, she had shifted the perception of humans among the oldest beings in the galaxy. Alira stepped off the platform slowly. Her muscles were tired and her mind was weary, but her resolve remained intact. She had learned much during the trial, not just about the dragons but about herself. Fear could be controlled. Power could be observed and understood. Survival was not about strength alone, it was about presence, patience, and clarity of thought. The council murmured among themselves, their voices low. Some were impressed, some wary, but all recognized that she had changed something fundamental. A human, once considered fragile, had endured a trial that even some dragons would hesitate to face. They would speak of her endurance for decades, perhaps centuries. Veilthrix approached her as the council dispersed. "You have done what few could even imagine," he said. "Not because you are strong in scale or muscle but because you are strong in mind and spirit. That is a lesson we have ignored for too long." Elira nodded, her expression calm. "Strength is not only in power," she said. "It is in understanding, patience and courage. That is why humans survive even when dragons think they cannot." The dragon leader studied her silently for a long moment. He had ruled for centuries, seen countless humans and judged countless allies and enemies. Yet this human had done what no one else could. She had endured the trial older than fire and emerged not just alive, but stronger in presence and spirit. For the first time in centuries, the council had no argument against her. They could only observe, their ancient minds realizing that humans might hold strengths they had overlooked. And in the quiet aftermath of the trial, a subtle change had begun in the Dominion, one that would ripple across the galaxy in ways none could yet predict. Elira walked from the chamber with steady steps. The trial was over, but its effects had just begun. She had not only survived, it was clear that she was beginning to reshape the way the dragons thought about humans, and perhaps even about themselves. The morning after the trial, the citadel felt different. Light streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows over the stone floors. Elira Voss walked through the halls with quiet confidence. She had survived the trial older than fire, and the dragons knew it. The elders no longer whispered about her as a fragile human, they watched her with cautious respect. Even the younger dragons, once skeptical and curious, now seemed to study her with interest rather than suspicion. Veilthrix stood at the center of the hall, his massive form calm and steady. He had ruled the Dominion for 750 years, but today he was more attentive than ever. Humans had always been seen as weak, fragile creatures, but Elira had proven them wrong. Not with strength, not with fire or claws, but with endurance, patience and courage. He realized that this young human had brought something the dragons had never truly valued: adaptability. The news of her survival spread beyond the citadel. Across the galaxy, whispers turned into stories. Traders told travelers, travelers told soldiers, and soldiers told scholars. Humans everywhere began to see themselves differently. They were not fragile as the dragons had assumed. They were clever, resilient, and capable of facing beings far older and stronger than themselves. In colonies far from the Dominion, parents spoke of Elira's courage to their children, teaching them that survival required more than strength. It required thought, patience, and understanding. Inside the citadel, Elira began to influence the dragons in subtle ways. She asked questions about their history, their victories, their failures. She observed their strategies, their rules, their patterns of thought. And in her calm, patient manner, she offered perspectives that the dragons had not considered in centuries. Some elders were cautious, unsure if humans could truly understand their ways. Others were intrigued, realizing that her insights, though simple, could strengthen the Dominion in ways tradition never had. Veilthrix approached her in the observation hall, where the city below stretched like a metallic forest of towers and glowing energy lines. "You have changed more than the council knows," he said. "They see your endurance, your calm, but they do not yet see the larger truth. Humans adapt in ways we cannot predict." Elira nodded. "We survive not by power but by learning and understanding. We see patterns, notice changes, and act when others are blind. That is what humanity brings." The dragon leader considered her words, his golden eyes reflecting the light of the city. He had lived centuries, seen empires rise and fall, yet this simple truth felt new. Strength alone was not enough. Patience, observation, and the ability to endure challenges with clarity could change the course of history. In that moment he realized that humanity was not a species to dominate, it was a species to respect. The council began to notice subtle shifts in the Dominion. The younger dragons, once rigid in tradition, started to experiment with new methods and strategies, influenced quietly by the human among them. The elders, though slow to change, began to consider ideas they had dismissed for centuries. Elira had done what no dragon had done in generations. She had inspired reconsideration, curiosity, and growth. Meanwhile, the human colonies began to act differently. They sent envoys to the Dominion not as supplicants but as partners. They shared knowledge, resources, and strategies. The dragons, guided quietly by Veilthrix and influenced by Elira, accepted the humans not out of fear but out of respect. The alliance that had seemed impossible only days ago began to form, based not on conquest, but on mutual understanding. Elira herself walked among the dragons, speaking calmly, observing carefully, and offering advice when asked. She did not rule. She did not command. She simply shared insights and demonstrated that survival was not about dominance, it was about comprehension, adaptation, and courage. Veilthrix watched her closely, proud of her achievements, and aware that the Dominion had entered a new era because of her presence. As the weeks passed, the galaxy began to understand a new truth. Humans were not weak. They could endure the impossible, adapt to challenges far beyond their size or lifespan, and influence creatures older and stronger than themselves. Elira had become more than a symbol. She had become proof that intelligence, patience, and courage could rival brute strength. The Citadel, once cold and imposing, now felt alive with possibility. Dragons moved with curiosity rather than suspicion. Humans were welcomed as partners rather than subjects. And Elira, the 19-year-old who had married a 750-year-old dragon leader, had survived the night, the trial, and the council, not as a fragile human, but as a living example of what humanity could bring to the stars. Veilthrix finally spoke one evening, his voice echoing softly through the observation hall. You have shown us what we have ignored for centuries. Humanity does not conquer through fear. It survives through wisdom. That is the lesson you bring. Elira smiled faintly, watching the stars. Strength is not only in fire or claws, she said. It is in learning, adapting, and enduring. That is what humanity offers, and it is enough. The dragon leader nodded, his massive head dipping slightly in acknowledgement. The Dominion was changing, the Council was learning, and the galaxy had begun to whisper of humans not as weak creatures, but as enduring, clever, and valuable allies. Elira Voss had not only survived, she had shown the galaxy that humanity's true power lay not in its size or age, but in its mind, heart, and spirit. The stars beyond the Citadel seemed brighter that night, as if reflecting the hope and courage she had brought. And in that light, Elira understood that survival was only the beginning. Humanity had arrived not to dominate but to endure, adapt, and inspire, even the oldest beings in the galaxy.